The first time I saw him, he was nothing more than a fleeting figure on my front porch, framed by the golden hues of the late afternoon sun. I hadn't ordered anything unusual, just my weekly produce delivery, but something about him made my pulse quicken, an unfamiliar sensation stirring deep within me. He looked no older than 22, with sandy brown hair that fell messily over his forehead and an athletic build that carried a quiet confidence. His uniform was slightly wrinkled, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and his smile was easy, boyish, disarming. I told myself it was harmless admiration, just a flicker of warmth on an otherwise ordinary day. "We're Collins?" he asked, his voice steady yet carrying a hint of uncertainty, as if he wasn't quite sure he had the right house. "That's me," I replied, stepping aside to let him carry the crates inside. My gaze flickered to his name tag. Daniel, a simple name for what I assumed was a simple young man. As he walked past me, carrying the boxes to the kitchen, I found myself watching him. There was something about the way he moved, efficient, strong, purposeful, that felt magnetic. I hadn't felt this kind of curiosity in years, and it unsettled me. "You've got a beautiful home," he remarked, glancing around with genuine admiration. "Thank you," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I've lived here for over 25 years. He smiled, and for a fleeting moment I felt lighter, younger. But I quickly pushed the feeling aside. He was just a delivery worker, and I was a woman approaching 55. Whatever brief flicker of attraction I thought I had felt was nothing more than a passing illusion. As he left, he turned back with a thoughtful expression. "If you ever need help with anything heavier next time, just let me know. I don't mind lending a hand." I thanked him, closing the door behind him, but for the rest of the evening, his voice lingered in my mind, his presence echoing in the quiet corners of my home. It was foolish, I told myself, to dwell on something so trivial, and yet, when the next delivery day arrived, I found myself glancing out the window more often than usual, waiting for the familiar truck to pull into the driveway. When it finally did, my heart gave an involuntary leap, and I scolded myself for such a reaction. Daniel greeted me with the same effortless smile, stepping inside with the crates of produce. This time, he stayed a little longer, helping me organize the groceries and chatting about his plans for the future. He spoke with such enthusiasm about his dream of finishing his business degree, how he was working long shifts to save up for tuition. He was charming without trying, his laughter easy, contagious. By the time he left, I realized I was smiling, something I hadn't done so freely in years. It was ridiculous, I told myself, to feel this way about someone so young, so entirely out of reach. And yet, no matter how much I reasoned with myself, I couldn't ignore the way he made me feel, alive again. Daniel became a regular presence in my life, though I tried to convince myself it was purely coincidental. Every Friday afternoon, without fail, he appeared at my doorstep with his casual grin and warm eyes, carrying my groceries with an eagerness that never seemed to wane. At first, our conversations were light. Small talk about the changing seasons, his delivery routes, and the occasional joke about the disarray of my spice cabinet. But as the weeks passed, our exchanges grew deeper. He told me about his struggles, his aspirations, how he dreamed of owning his own business one day. I listened, genuinely invested in his stories, and before I knew it, I was sharing pieces of myself as well. Memories of my youth, my past ambitions, the things I had once longed for but had let slip away. There was a shift between us, subtle but unmistakable, a quiet understanding, a connection neither of us acknowledged outright, yet one that became harder to ignore. One afternoon, as he set down the last crate, he hesitated before speaking. "You know, I always look forward to these deliveries." His words caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. The air between us felt charged, as though something unspoken was hovering just beneath the surface. He looked at me then, not just a glance, but truly looked at me, and I felt the weight of it, the depth. I swallowed, forcing a smile. "Well, I suppose I should start tipping you better then." He chuckled, shaking his head. "It's not about that. I just enjoy being here." His words were simple, but they unsettled something in me. A part of me wanted to dismiss it, to laugh it off as nothing more than youthful kindness. But another part of me, the one that had been dormant for far too long, recognized the truth beneath them. As he left that day, I lingered by the door longer than I should have, watching his truck disappear down the road. I didn't know what to make of what was happening between us. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. But one thing was certain. I wasn't ready to let go just yet. His voice would light up whenever he spoke about his dreams, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. "I'm planning to start classes next fall," he said one day, stacking cans neatly in my cabinet. "It's not easy juggling work and saving up, but I'll get there." "Sounds like you've got it all figured out," I replied, handing him a bag of pasta to store. He glanced at me, his expression softening. "Not really. I'm just trying to keep moving forward." "What about you? What keeps you going?" The question caught me off guard. No one had asked me that in years. My life had become a monotonous routine. Wake up, clean the house, watch television, and wait for the next day to begin. I realized how empty it all sounded and hesitated before responding. "I suppose just keeping things in order," I said finally, avoiding his gaze. Daniel didn't press further, but something about his silence made me feel exposed. It was as if he could see through the facade I had carefully built over the years. The weeks blurred together, and with every visit, I found myself anticipating his arrival more. I began to notice things about him that I shouldn't have, how his sleeves rolled up to reveal toned forearms, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the faint scent of cologne that lingered after he left. These were details I had no business noticing, but they consumed me nonetheless. One afternoon, while unpacking groceries, I accidentally dropped a jar of marinara sauce. It shattered against the floor, red splattering across the tiles like blood. "Oh no!" I exclaimed, bending down to clean up the mess. "Don't worry, I've got it," Daniel said, crouching beside me. Our hands brushed as we reached for the shards, and I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me. For a moment we froze, staring at each other. His expression was unreadable, but I felt my face flush. I quickly pulled my hand back, focusing on the cleanup to avoid his gaze. "Sorry about that," I mumbled, my voice barely audible. "It's fine," he said, his tone softer than usual. Accidents happen. As he helped me clean, the silence between us felt charged, heavy with unspoken words. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or if he felt it too, but something had shifted. Later that evening, as I sat alone in my living room, the memory of our brief touch replayed in my mind. I told myself it was nothing, a fleeting moment of clumsiness, but the way my heart raced told a different story. The following week, I decided to bake him a batch of cookies as a thank you for all his help. When he arrived, his eyes lit up at the sight of the plate. "Are these for me?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine surprise. "They are," I said, feeling uncharacteristically shy. "It's just a small way to say thanks for everything you do." He grinned, taking a bite of one. "These are amazing. You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," I said, my heart fluttering at his reaction. As he finished unpacking the groceries, he glanced at the clock on my wall. "I've got a little extra time before my next stop," he said. "Mind if I stay for a bit?" The question caught me off guard, but I found myself nodding. "Of course. Would you like some tea or coffee?" "Tea sounds great," he said, settling onto the couch. I joined him after preparing the tea, and for the first time we sat together without the barrier of tasks or obligations. We talked about everything: his childhood, my past, the things we loved and regretted. The conversation flowed easily, unforced, and I felt something in me begin to thaw. "You have such an interesting life," he said, his voice filled with admiration. I laughed, shaking my head. "Not really. Most of it has been ordinary." "Ordinary isn't bad," he replied, his gaze steady. "Sometimes it's comforting." The way he looked at me in that moment made my breath catch. It wasn't the way a delivery boy looks at a customer. It was something deeper, something that both excited and terrified me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in a warm golden glow, I realized how dangerous this had become. He was young, vibrant, with a life full of possibilities ahead of him, and I was a woman nearing 60, clinging to the scraps of attention he so freely gave. But no matter how much I tried to reason with myself, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. It was irrational, reckless, and entirely out of character, and yet I couldn't bring myself to push him away. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. His laughter, his touch, the way his eyes seemed to see right through me. It all consumed me. I knew I was teetering on the edge of something dangerous, but I couldn't bring myself to step back. The line between right and wrong blurred, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. The days leading up to Daniel's next delivery felt excruciatingly long, my thoughts consumed by the growing tension between us. I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting fascination with someone younger and full of life. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't fleeting, and it wasn't harmless. When Friday finally arrived, I found myself obsessing over every detail. My hair, my clothes, the way the house smelled. I had never cared about these things before, but Daniel had awakened something dormant within me, something I hadn't felt in decades. When he arrived, his smile seemed brighter than usual, his presence filling the room with an energy I couldn't resist. He unpacked the groceries as he always did, but this time he lingered even after the last bag was empty. "Tea?" I offered, my voice trembling slightly. "Sure," he said, sitting at the kitchen table. I poured us each a cup, trying to steady my hands as I joined him. The silence between us felt charged, like a storm waiting to break. "You seem different today," he said, his eyes studying me. "Different how?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I don't know. Happier, maybe, or distracted." I laughed nervously, brushing off his observation. "Just trying to enjoy the little things, I guess." He nodded, sipping his tea. "That's a good way to live." Our conversation drifted to lighter topics, but beneath the surface I could feel the unspoken tension building. It was like a dance, one we were both too afraid to lead, each of us waiting for the other to make the first move. As the afternoon stretched on, Daniel glanced at his watch and sighed. "I should probably get going," he said, though he made no effort to stand. "You don't have to rush," I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You sure?" I nodded, my heart racing. "Stay a little longer." He hesitated for a moment, then leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at his lips. "All right." The next hour passed in a blur. We talked, laughed, and shared stories like old friends, but the space between us felt electric. Every glance, every accidental brush of our hands seemed to carry a weight I couldn't ignore. Finally, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Daniel stood, his gaze lingering on me. "I really should go," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Okay," I said softly, walking him to the door, but as he turned to leave, something inside me snapped. Before I could think, I reached out, my fingers grazing his arm. "Wait," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned back, his eyes searching mine. "What is it?" I opened my mouth to speak, but found myself at a loss for words. Instead, I stepped closer, the air between us crackling with unspoken desire. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, as if pulled by an invisible force, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine. The kiss was tentative at first, almost shy, but it quickly deepened, the hunger between us undeniable. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathless. "I shouldn't have done that," I said, guilt crashing over me like a wave. "Neither should I," he replied, though his tone lacked regret. We stood there in silence, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavy in the air. I don't know what this means," I said finally, my voice trembling. "Neither do I," he admitted, "but I don't want it to stop." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I knew this was dangerous, reckless, and entirely inappropriate, but in that moment, I didn't care. As he left, I stood in the doorway, watching him disappear down the driveway. My heart was a whirlwind of emotions: excitement, guilt, fear, and something else I couldn't quite name. That night, I lay awake, replaying the kiss in my mind. It was wrong, I knew that, but it had also been exhilarating, a spark in a life that had grown cold and predictable. I told myself it was just one moment, a lapse in judgment that wouldn't happen again. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. In the days that followed, my mind became a battlefield of emotions. I replayed that kiss over and over, the memory of Daniel's lips against mine, a bittersweet torment. Every logical part of me screamed that it had to stop, that I was risking too much. But the longing in my chest drowned out all reason. I didn't expect him to return so soon, but the following Tuesday, there he was, standing at my door. Not in his uniform, but in casual clothes, a simple t-shirt and jeans, yet he looked effortlessly magnetic. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his voice softer than usual. "No, not at all," I replied, my heart racing. "What are you doing here?" He responded, "I couldn't stop thinking about you," he admitted, stepping inside. "I had to see you again." His words hit me like a thunderbolt. I should have sent him away, closed the door, and ended it before it spiraled further out of control. But instead, I stepped aside, letting him in. We sat in the living room, the tension between us palpable. He fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. "I don't know what this is," he said, breaking the silence, "but I can't get you out of my head." "I don't know either," I confessed, my voice barely audible. When Daniel returned that Tuesday, I should have closed the door. I should have told him it was wrong, that whatever we thought we were feeling was nothing but a fleeting fantasy born from my loneliness and his youthful curiosity. But as he stood there, his dark eyes locked on mine, I knew I wouldn't send him away. He followed me into the living room, his presence both comforting and unsettling. I could feel the weight of his gaze as I sat down, my hands trembling slightly as I smoothed the fabric of my dress. He sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. The silence between us was thick, charged with an unspoken intensity neither of us wanted to acknowledge. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but words failed me. Instead, I looked at him, and he looked back, something deeper passing between us. Something I wasn't sure I could resist. The logical part of me whispered that this had to end, that I was risking too much, but logic had long since abandoned me. All that remained was the quiet hum of desire, the unshakable pull towards something I couldn't quite name. As Daniel reached out, his fingers brushed against mine, tentative but intentional. I inhaled sharply, feeling my resolve slip further away. In that moment, I realized the truth I had been too afraid to face. I didn't want to stop this, and neither did he. "I shouldn't have come," he said, his voice low. But I couldn't stay away. I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Daniel, this is dangerous." "I know," he whispered. "But tell me you don't feel it too." I opened my mouth to deny it, to push him away, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I felt my defenses crumbling, the walls I had built around my heart shattering in the face of his honesty. "I do," I admitted, the confession falling from my lips like a stone sinking into deep water. "But that doesn't make it right. Sometimes what feels right doesn't fit into the world's rules," he said, his hand brushing against mine. That touch was all it took. The fragile thread of restraint holding me together snapped, and before I could think, I leaned in, my lips finding his. This kiss was different from the first. It was desperate, hungry, a collision of need and longing that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. His hands found their way to my waist, pulling me closer as the world outside faded away. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Every touch, every breath, every whispered word ignited a fire within me that I hadn't known still existed. Daniel was careful yet passionate, his youthful energy blending seamlessly with the quiet wisdom of someone who seemed to understand me in ways no one else ever had. Hours melted away as we lost ourselves in each other, time becoming meaningless, a forgotten concept as we explored the boundaries of this forbidden connection. It was reckless and impulsive, but it was also beautiful, a moment suspended in time, free from judgment or consequence. Eventually, reality crept back in, casting a shadow over our stolen moments. As we lay side by side, our breaths mingling in the quiet of the room, I felt the weight of guilt pressing down on me like a stone. "This can't keep happening," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't want to hurt you," Daniel replied, his hand brushing a strand of hair from my face. "But I also don't want to lose this." His words tore at my heart. I knew he meant them, but I also knew the impossibility of what we were doing. We were from two different worlds, separated by decades of life experience and societal expectations. No matter how much we wanted it, there was no future for us. "We have to be careful," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of the truth. "This can't last forever." "I know," he said, his eyes filled with an intensity that both comforted and scared me. "But for now, can we just have this?" I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. I knew it was selfish, that I was clinging to something that could never truly be mine, but in that moment, I didn't care. I wanted to hold on to the fleeting happiness Daniel had brought into my life, even if it meant risking everything. As he left that night, the ache in my chest was almost unbearable. I stood at the door, watching him disappear into the darkness, knowing that every moment we spent together brought us closer to the inevitable end, and yet I couldn't stop. The taste of his lips, the warmth of his touch, the way he made me feel like I was the only woman in the world, it was intoxicating, addictive. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't bring myself to walk away. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and whispered secrets. Daniel found more reasons to visit, each encounter more dangerous than the last. We knew we were walking a fine line, but neither of us was willing to let go. Every time he left, the guilt returned, gnawing at the edges of my happiness. I knew I was betraying the life I had built, the woman I had once been, but with Daniel I felt something I hadn't in years. A spark of joy, a reminder that I was still alive, still capable of love and passion. I told myself it would end soon, that we would part ways before it was too late, but deep down I knew the truth. I was too far gone, caught in a web of desire and longing that I couldn't escape. The days leading up to the inevitable unraveling were both euphoric and agonizing. Daniel and I lived in a fragile bubble, each stolen moment feeling like a victory against time, fate, and consequence. But deep down, I knew it couldn't last. The walls we had built to shield our affair from the outside world were thin, and cracks had begun to form. It was a quiet Friday evening when the bubble finally burst. Daniel had stopped by after his shift, his smile as warm as ever, but there was a tension in the air I couldn't place. I thought maybe it was guilt catching up with me, the weight of the lies we told ourselves pressing harder than ever. We sat on the couch, the space between us filled with unspoken words. He reached for my hand, his thumb tracing soft circles on my skin. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice hesitant. "About what?" I asked, my heart already bracing for the worst. "About us," he said, his eyes searching mine. "What we're doing, where this is going." I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. "And what have you decided?" "I don't want to hurt you," he said, his voice cracking. "But I don't know if I can keep doing this. It's not fair to either of us." The words cut through me like a knife. I had known this was coming, had prepared myself for the day he would walk away, but hearing him say it out loud was a pain I wasn't ready for. "You think this is easy for me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Do you think I don't know how wrong this is?" "I know," he said, his eyes filled with regret. "But that doesn't make it any easier. You deserve more than this. We both do." Tears blurred my vision as I pulled my hand away, the emptiness where his touch had been feeling unbearable. "So that's it? You're leaving?" "I don't want to," he said, his voice breaking, "but I don't see another way." The room fell silent, his words settling over us like a heavy blanket. I wanted to beg him to stay, to tell him that we could make it work, but I knew it was a lie. There was no future for us, no happy ending waiting on the other side of this mess. "I love you," I said finally, the confession tumbling out before I could stop it. His breath hitched, his eyes widening in surprise. "I love you too," he whispered. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the truth hanging between us like a fragile thread. Then, without another word, he pulled me into his arms, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was both desperate and bittersweet. It felt like goodbye, even as we clung to each other, unwilling to let go. When we finally broke apart, his forehead rested against mine, his eyes closed as if he were memorizing the moment. "I'll never forget you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't say that," I whispered, my tears soaking into his shirt. "It makes it harder." He pulled back, his hand brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Goodbye, Clara." And then he was gone, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing through the empty house. For weeks I felt like a ghost, wandering through my life in a daze. The house felt too quiet, the spaces he had filled now empty and cold. I tried to move on, to focus on rebuilding the life I had before Daniel, but nothing felt the same. One evening, as I sorted through a stack of mail, I found a small envelope with no return address. Inside was a simple note, written in Daniel's familiar handwriting. "I'll always remember the way you made me feel alive. Thank you for everything. Be happy." Tears streamed down my face as I read the words, my heart aching with both sorrow and gratitude. Daniel had been a spark in the darkness, a reminder that even in the quietest corners of life, passion and love could still exist. Though our time together had been brief, it had changed me in ways I couldn't fully understand. I had loved and lost, but in doing so, I had found a part of myself I thought was long gone. As I stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I realized that life was a series of moments, some fleeting, some lasting, but all meaningful in their own way. And though Daniel was gone, his presence lingered in my heart, a bittersweet memory that would stay with me forever.